Hey everybody, this is Vicki Morris and I want to invite you to join us for a candid conversation with Steve Levy and Thom Rigsby. They are business advisors that are going to share a little bit more insight with you on starting and growing a healthy and sustainable business. This is a carryover conversation from our panel discussion, and they're going to continue to share some great insights with you to help you build a very strong business. I hope you join us for the rest of the show. Thanks.
Hey, I'm here today with my friend Steve Levy from SEL and Associates Business Advisors.
I'm here with Thom Rigsby from Thom Rigsby Coaching. I've known Thom for many years, respect a lot of the work that he does, have run across a few people that have worked with him and heard nothing but good things. And Thom and I have started to collaborate together over the past year or so through our Coffee and Coaching series, which is a education series that covers all different aspects related to business, and we have one starting up here at the end of February.
Well, a couple of weeks ago we had some folks together for one of the Rise morning events, and there were a couple of lingering questions left after that, a couple of topics that we thought maybe we would take a stab at today. So
I think that's a great idea.
Sound okay to you?
Sounds good to me. So
all right.
So let's start it.
So one of the things that I know we talked about that got a lot of conversation going was whether to insource or outsource the things that you do for your business. How do you guide clients for that decision?
Okay, so there's two critical things every business has to do. One is find its customers, and the second one is serve its customers. And usually those are things that you want to be responsible for and having your organization do. All the rest of the stuff is just stuff.
Yeah.
And typically your expertise is not there, so things like accounting, human resources, legal, environmental, safety, all those things can be handled very well by people that are professionals, subject matter experts in those areas. And even though you may feel you're paying a lot for their time and their service, their expertise and their efficiency will more than offset that cost.
Right.
And it takes away from the time that you would have spent working on finding your customers or serving your customers.
Yeah, I actually had a client that I worked with a few years back who, once we kind of got into the conversation about where she was spending her time, she said that she spent the afternoon working in QuickBooks. And I said, which afternoon? And she said, every afternoon. I'm like, wait, every day you're in the back working in QuickBooks? Oh yeah. Like, doing what? What could you possibly spend that much time doing? And what we found out was because she was not well versed in how to do those things in QuickBooks, she was having to try and figure it out and learn on her own. And I said, look, if you just put all this stuff in a box and take it to the accountant or bookkeeper that knows how to do that, yes, you have to pay them. I understand that. But look at how much more time you'd be spending out front finding and serving customers.
I mean, it's a simple formula, but your time is your most precious commodity. And when you're working at your peak efficiency on the things that really matter and add value to your business, that's worth a number. Could be $200 an hour, could be $500 an hour.
Yep.
And if you think of it in those terms, that opportunity cost, in other words, not doing those things that add the real value to your business, is now wasted, lost, and can't be recovered.
And can't be recovered. That's the
gone.
most important thing to remember out of that. Once that opportunity to upsell the customer or to find a new customer, once that's gone, you don't get that one back.
That's right. And then the other part of it, on some of the areas that we've talked about, and I think of like taxes, the IRS as an example has no sense of humor, so doing it wrong and then having them come in and say, hey, you made a mistake, and you saying, well, I had best intentions, I was trying to do it correctly, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, you didn't.
You didn't, so here's your fine.
Here's your bill.
Yeah.
And we'll just put a lock on the door until you figure out how to pay it.
Exactly.
Man, that's tough.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of along the same lines, there's another question about how do you find and keep good people? We talked a little bit about that a couple of weeks ago. Is it similar? I mean, if we find an accountant who's good at accounting, bookkeeping, let them do their art. How do we find the people in the business that find and serve customers? What kind of things do we look for out of the people we're going to directly employ?
Okay, so that's clearly one of the most important items most business owners struggle with. And just to back up a little bit, a common practice that startup businesses will do is they'll hire friends, they'll hire family members, only because, well, I know them, so I can trust them. Well, there's a reason why your cousin's sister doesn't have regular employment, okay? And
Yes.
you hiring her just moves that problem over to you, and it also makes it a full-time, lifetime employee.
Right.
Because how are you going to
How you
tell
gonna
your
fire
cousin?
them, right.
How are you going to tell your cousin you got to fire their sister?
Right.
So there's those kinds of things that you run into when you start looking for people. So to me, the critical thing is always knowing what skill sets and what behaviors that person needs to have to fill that position.
Right.
And I'll argue that the behaviors are probably more important than the skill sets, because how people act and behave is going to make or break their ability to be successful in whatever that position is that you're hiring them for.
Right. I mean, I like to tell business owners, you can teach a lot of competencies,
Right.
but you can't teach those intangibles, the things that people have to bring to the table already. I had a conversation with a client not too long ago who was having some real difficulty hiring the right people for his business. And kind of at the end of the day, his challenge was that he was afraid to hire the right people because they were going to challenge him. And it's a mindset shift that you have to make, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a huge shift, and part of it also gets back to the ability to let go of some of the responsibilities and the decision making, or said differently, the ability to delegate down responsibilities and tasks and activities. So bringing in people that are actually smarter than you in a given subject area is actually a positive thing to have happen. And having those people challenge you is also a good thing, because change and innovation doesn't come by doing things exactly the way you want them done. The
Right.
change and innovation from your organization will come from your people that bring a different view, a different skill set, a different background and experience. And as long as your environment is such that it's open and allows people to share ideas without getting verbal backlash,
Right.
then you have an opportunity to actually start to move your business forward and get a multiplier effect out of adding people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things, one of the things I said a couple of weeks ago is just because they don't do it the way you would do it doesn't make it wrong. It's actually possible you could find a better way to do it.
Right.
And once you're open to that, because as you pointed out, if all I want is to hire people to do things the way that I would do them and then oversee them and micromanage them, I've made more work for myself instead of making it easier for myself.
Right.
And that happens a lot more than people might imagine.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And I've got many a client that I've worked with over the years, as I'm sure you have too, that the biggest impediment to moving forward is that actual owner.
Right. They are their own biggest problem.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something we didn't get to spend a tremendous amount of time on, but it's super important to the business. It's cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between having cash and having cash flow. Do you find that is a distinction that a lot of business owners don't understand?
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental problem that a lot of them get into, and it stems from a couple of different areas as to what can affect it. Sort of the initial view that I get when I first meet with clients and they talk about the fact that I know the business is profitable, but there just never seems to be any cash in the bank account. And a lot of times it stems from a couple of key areas. An obvious one is they think they're profitable on everything they do, but they're really not.
Right.
And that's a dive into what are the real costs associated with providing a product or service. Another area that becomes a big problem with cash flow is credit terms with their customers. And I use this example all the time. I had a client I was working with a number of years ago, and he had that cash flow issue. And I said, hey, let's take a look at your accounts receivable aging. And his first question to me is, what's that?
What's that?
So after I explained to him what that was, he had his bookkeeper go run an AR aging report. And sure enough, there was about $40,000 in the 90-day plus category with one specific customer.
Yeah.
And I just said to him, who's that customer? He says, oh, that's my best customer. I said, are you sure about
I
that?
bet they are.
And then my next question to him was, and let me guess, you've got a crew out at his facility today doing more work for him. He said, absolutely, I
Sure
do.
do.
That's the place that keeps my lights on. And I said, I disagree.
They're why you don't ever have any money in the bank. You know, in a similar vein, I had a client I worked with one time. It was a retail chain. I think they had 12 or 13 stores, and they had no clue when we came in to begin working with them. Had no clue what inventory turns were, and it was just, hey, if we've got more money in the bank than we had at the end of last month, we're doing good. And somehow they had managed to get, to 12 or 13 locations. But it was only because of the margins that they had and kind of dumb luck in the cash flow arena that they were able to survive. Mm-hmm. Is that something that, what do you do when you find a client that is having that kind of difficulty? What do you do? I mean, do you try to educate them? Do you show them how to read the reports? I mean, how do you work with them?
Okay, so with every business, there's usually 5, maybe 6, maybe 8 metrics that kind of tell you how you're doing. And it's different for every business, and it's important to figure out what those are. So a lot of them can typically be found inside of the profit and loss statement or the balance sheet. So what I try to do is I show the business owner what I looked for in his information or her information to identify where are some potential problem areas that need to be addressed, because the education of how to use those reports is invaluable. A lot of my clients think of them as tools for their accountant or CPA to go file their taxes at the end of the year, when in reality it's a management tool, and you have to treat it as such. It's no different than looking at a sales report or a backlog report or whatever it is that you're looking at. The profit and loss statement and the balance sheet tell you the health of your business and will also point out areas where you have taken actions and either you are getting the results you anticipated or you're not. And if you're not, okay, let's go figure out what didn't work correctly and let's go fix it. So it is an education process, and for a number of the clients that I've worked with over the years, they have learned how to actually look at that report, and not just once a year, but at least every month to see where we're at.
Yeah, I think that, I'm a big advocate of do what you do best and hire the rest. We talked about that a few minutes ago, but while you can delegate the bookkeeping and accounting to someone else, one of the things you can't delegate is reading, interpreting, and reacting to what those reports tell you. And I kind of told this story as a joke one time, but it turned out to be true more often than not. If the communication that you have with your accountant kind of goes like this, you have a problem. It's like, hey, I emailed you your reports. Have you had a chance to look at them? Yeah, is there anything on there I need to worry about? Well, it kind of look okay to me. All right, great, thanks. I'll talk to you next month. That's a problem. Yeah. Right? You need to be able to look at those reports and run the business from those reports.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a football coach or basketball coach trying to run a game without watching the game.
It is. It is. Or to review what happened in the game without looking at the box score. It's the same kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one more category, and I think this will cover a lot of what we wanted to talk about. Growth, how to grow the business, and kind of related to that, how can we evaluate an idea or an opportunity to see if it's something worth pursuing?
Okay, so those really are two pretty significant items that are certainly going to be hard to do full justice to in the next few minutes, but we're going to give it a shot.
We'll take a stab at it.
We're going to take a shot. So, in no particular order, let's talk about the growth piece first. Okay. So, you've got a business, you've got a product or service that you provide, you've gotten to a level of success that you've got some meaningful revenue, you've now got some employees, you've got some type of an organization structure, to whatever extent you have some brand recognition or presence in the marketplace. But there's some things out there that are obviously going well because you've gotten through that startup phase, you've gotten through the infantile death syndrome that is very common with a lot of startup business. It's just what it is.
Yeah.
So now it's time to go look to what else can we go do. And this is where you got to get creative, and this is where you need to draw some of those people that you've got in your organization that you trust, that understand the business, that have brought some critical value to the company, to talk about what do we do next.
Right.
And the first assessment I always like to do is, well, what do we do well? What got us to where we are at? Is it our customer service? Is it our warranties? Is it a ad campaign that we ran that was highly successful? You know, what was it that made the business get to this point, or what were the combination of things? And then you want to take those core competencies, and people use that word all the time, but it really matters. You know, what do you really do well? So I'll give an example. I did this with a client a few years back that was in the heating and air conditioning business. And I asked him what his core competency was, and he said, well, it's fixing air conditioners. And I said, are you sure? And we talked about it some more, and what he started to realize, it was really the service side of the equation. The fact that they return calls promptly, the techs show up when they're supposed to show up, they are professionally dressed, they treat the homeowners with respect, they share the appropriate amount of information, et cetera, et cetera. So what we started to conclude is that we are a customer service-based company that happens to fix air conditioners.
Right.
So then we talked about, so what other skill sets do your technicians have? Well, to do an air conditioner, we have to know electrical, we have to know plumbing, right? So there's other things they have to know. So it became a natural segue into, so gee, if I'm already calling on a customer that I service well, that I happen to fix their air conditioner, and they happen to mention they have a plumbing problem or an electrical problem, do we want to be able to offer that as a service as well?
You know, I see a lot companies, like as you described, that have gotten through, you know, the first year or two. They've survived the startup, and they're feeling like they're kind of stable, and they want to grow, and they want to go off in a direction that's almost diametrically opposed to how they got to where they are. And I, you know, like you, I encourage them to think about adjacent markets. What do you already do well? Now what's close to that you can bring in instead of, you know, adding tires?
Rockets.
Building rockets. Everybody here builds rockets.
Yeah.
So how do you go, so adjacent, you know, something that's kind of built off the core competency that you already have, but what are some of the questions we need to ask about that particular product or service to determine whether that's a good idea or not?
Right. So that's sort of the vetting process.
Right.
Okay. Which is, you start to put the concept together, and we'll stick with the sort of the example we've been using just because I think it works.
Yeah.
So if we already sort of have the customer base, okay, so now what specific skill sets do we need to have to do that?
Right.
What things do we need to change in the organization to now handle, be it plumbing, electrical, whatever else it is that we're going to go do? What equipment do we need to have, et cetera? And then start to put a model together that says, okay, if I invest the money that I need in these talents, these skill sets, how much additional business do I think I'm going to get? And you already have this whole experience of fixing air conditioners as an example that you can build off of. But going a step further, this is where you want to draw in some other people. You might go talk to some of your good customers and say, what do you think if we offer this? Would you be interested? And that feedback is invaluable, because it is amazing what people will tell you when you ask, what do you think about, and then fill in the blank.
You know, we can come up with a pretty great idea, but it's really not up to us whether it's going to make $1 or not. I mean, it's up to the client. And at some point in my journey, a mentor told me, he said, if you really want to test whether somebody will buy it or not, ask them to pay you for it. well, will you pre-buy a year's worth of service? I don't know, right? But having that feedback, having that direct feedback, and one of the advantages that you have from already being in business is that you have a known customer base. And one of the things that is one of those latent opportunities a lot of times for me as I begin working with clients is they've spent years maybe collecting customers' email addresses and never talked to them.
Right.
They just wait for them to come back in the door. I'm like, well, let's do something with these email addresses. Oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's how you get that feedback, is just by having the conversation. And then, so one final thing. As you have an idea, you put your presentation together. You want to, and maybe you line up a couple of key clients, key customers, and you want to pitch that idea to them. What is the single most important thing to do when you're ready to pitch that idea and get feedback?
Okay, you want to make sure your technology works.
Yes.
So that the presentation goes smoothly.
You got all the cables you
You
need,
got the cables you need. You're there on time.
and be on time. Just saying. Okay, I think that's all good information. Anything else you think we need to cover?
Well, the last thing that I'll always throw out when we do
Okay.
these kinds of things is that nobody has the market cornered on all the answers,
That is true.
and people like Tom and myself provide that feedback because we've been there, we've done it, we know what works, we know what doesn't work, and we can give some of that meaningful feedback to you as a either prospective business owner or as an existing business owner, because that information that you've got in your head that sounds so great when you're staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
When you say it out loud to somebody that understands, it sometimes I've had clients talk to me after they've got this brilliant idea,
Yeah.
and as they start talking, they realize some of the flaws
yeah,
in the
well,
logic of what they've done. So,
I think you hit the nail on the head. Sometimes just saying it out loud to anybody,
yeah.
but saying it out loud to someone who can give you some of that feedback. And I agree. I don't think that any of us know everything, but there are a lot of people who have been down the road and can offer some feedback and even bring together a team to help you evaluate those ideas, learn how to run the business, and be successful in being a business owner.
Great.
All right.
Good.
Steve, thanks.
Good. So, I also have the pleasure of letting you all know that I am one of the sponsors for the Rise networking event. I've been doing it since 2018, and I provide the breakfast items that we serve to our various members and guests that come on a regular basis.
So here's a fact you may not have heard. Did you know that Huntsville has the third highest concentration of engineers in the country, behind only Silicon Valley and the Research Triangle? That's why we have put together Engineer to Entrepreneur as the first event in Innovate Huntsville Week 2019. Monday morning at 8 o'clock, we'll be hearing from an IP attorney, accountant, funding sources, lawyers, a panel of experts to talk about the transition that needs to occur to move you from the engineer role into an entrepreneur role. This Friday, March the 1st, I'll be speaking at Rise, Regional Innovators Sustaining the Ecosystem. This time we're going to talk about how to plan your projects in order to get them done. We'll plug in the P+4F framework that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, so be sure and attend. More information about Rise and all the events that are coming up for Innovate Huntsville Week can be found on the Innovate Huntsville website at innovatehsv.com.